Hello and welcome to Paramotor Dudes. Thank you to those that have returned for our second video, and for those of you that are new to the channel, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like the content that you see today, and please feel free to leave any comments. Thank you to those of you that left us feedback on our last video with regards to the lights. Hopefully our microphone will arrive next week and we'll be able to give you better audio. But for now, this is a video on weather and wind in particular, and we hope you enjoy it. Please fly safe. Remember, always check the weather.
Alright boys, ready to go?
Yeah, ready.
Yeah, I see a cycle.
So, small disclaimer before we start the video, please let me just note that we are not trained pilots. We are self-taught, and everything we bring to the channel is from our own personal experiences. We always recommend that pilots get training from accredited schools, and that you take the sport seriously. This can harm you in many ways. So please use these videos as guidance by all means, but please get sufficient training from approved schools. That is the first thing I want to say. So what I wanted to bring to the channel today was an experience I had last week flying with Mark, one of my friends. So the idea was we'd go down the field early in the morning before work, 7:15 a.m. Before sunrise, set the wing and the motor up, weather looked great, and we go for a short half-an-hour flight. So turn up to the field, we checked the weather beforehand. Wind speed on the ground was around 4 miles per hour. But when we got to the field, it pretty much felt still. There was no wind at all. So we had choice of direction in which we took off. And I've got a Spider, Ozone Spider wing, which is absolutely fantastic for nil wind launches. It's a very light wing. So we set up, took off on our normal route, and all seemed well. As I climbed out of the field, got to around 500 feet, the wing started to behave slightly different to as it would normally. Carried on climbing, got to around 800 feet, and I noticed that the wing sort of held back, and what I was basically greeted with was a headwind, which I would probably say was around 20 miles per hour. A constant wind, so it wasn't gusting, and what it basically did is started sidetracking me. So if you imagine driving in a car and going onto ice, the car starts to slide sideways. Exactly the same sort of happened with the wing. So at the first thing I noticed was I was flying straight in view, but actually I was going sideways at quite some speed. So I immediately radioed to Mark and said, you know, I can feel the wing is shifting to the right. And it was actually blowing me away from my landing field, which started to worry me. So at that point, I continued to climb, hoping that I'd get out of the wind. But as I climbed higher, it started to move me faster. The wind was still perfectly stable, and it was starting to sort of dip slightly on the left side, which is where the wind was coming from. So I turned the aircraft, so I was turning away from the drift. And what that did is that accelerated the wing. So I felt my ground speed pick up, because obviously I've now got a tailwind. Now, I've not flown in wind as strong and as constant as this before, hence I wanted to bring the video to the channel. So I radioed to Mark and asked what he thought I should do, and he immediately said, well, try and descend. The problem was, when I let off the power, it still continued to blow me, so I was sort of out of my comfort zone a little bit. So what I did, I turned back to the field and allowed the aircraft to settle and descend. So now I've got a very strong headwind. Now my concern at this point was, if I let off the power, it could blow me backwards and I could start flying backwards, and I've never been in a scenario where I've had a wing flying backwards. So I didn't really want to do that. So what I did, I kept the power on, but tried to find a point in which the power was keeping me still in the sky, moving me forward slightly, but also descending. So as I sort of came down, the aircraft started to fall out of this wind, and then it allowed me to track back to the field that I'd taken off from slowly. As approaching the field, I was around sort of 300, 400 feet, coming over the tree line, zero rotor wind. For those of you that don't know what rotor wind is, it's where turbulent wind hits obstacles on the ground and causes the wind to move around quite violently, which can unsettle the aircraft. So as I came into the field, you'll see on the video which I'm about to put up, I start to descend nicely, and I actually landed really smoothly into the field. I was trimmed in at this point, so the wing was flying as slow as it could be, because I was in nil wind. I didn't have a headwind when I was low down. So that was my experience. Quite a scary moment for me, if I'm totally honest, because you know, when you fly into a wind and you start getting blown away from your field at quite a rate, when you're not prepared for it, you've got to think, you know, as quickly as you can, but remain as safe as you can. So one thing I have started doing since then is actually checking the wind at new altitudes. Now, I use an app, and this is no endorsement, I use an app called Windy on the iPhone, which I have found to be absolutely fantastic. And you can actually pinpoint a reference on the map where you fly from, and it will actually tell you the wind and weather. You can set notifications for when the weather is in the parameters that you're happy to fly in. So what I started to realise is, on Windy you can check the wind speed at ground. You can check it at 2,000 feet as well. Now, what I'd failed to do on this day, because the wind was so calm on the ground, almost nil, I didn't think to check any higher, which was probably, you know, a really bad judgment by myself as a pilot, and one I will never do again, because I could have very easily found myself in a different situation whereby I didn't have somebody to talk to on the ground and sort of guide me through the steps. So thank you to Mark. But what it did is made me aware that how many other pilots, maybe new in training, are also relying on the wind speed at ground level, and also educating those that are new to flying to not make the same mistake I did. So how does wind work? So wind generally comes from pressure systems. So we have high pressure systems and low pressure systems, and when those pressure systems are close together, the pressure systems will try to equalize, thus moving air from one pressure system to the next, and this is where we get wind. Now, when you're on the ground, we have something called surface friction, which is things such as buildings, trees, mountains, hills. What these actually do is disturb and slow down wind. So when you're in a field surrounded with trees, it can actually feel, you know, quite relaxed in terms of the wind speed, whereas when you step above the trees or fly above the trees, you'll maybe be greeted with a wind. So ground friction really helps reduce wind on the ground, and something that I wasn't aware of in the early days of flying was that the higher you go, the faster the wind can become, and the more aggressive. So I generally fly between sort of 0 wind on the ground to 10 miles per hour max. But one thing I do like to try and consider, which is something that Mark taught me, was the separation between a steady wind and a gust. And this is something that the app Windy is very good at. It tells you what the wind speed would be gusting at. So if you get a gust of wind, that can really unsettle the wing. So it's really important that if you've got sort of a 2 mile an hour wind on the ground with a gust at 10, obviously that's an 8 miles per hour difference. So when you're flying in 2 miles per hour wind and you get hit with an 8 mile an hour gust, you can really knock the wing about and unsettle the aircraft. And certainly as a new pilot, bump tolerance is something you will need to build upon, but it's also something that unnerves you as a pilot. And you know, some of my early flights, you know, were really turbulent and rocky, and it almost put me off the sport. But then when you have a really calm winter day and you're flying, it brings back the enjoyment. So one thing I've realised is building up bump tolerance with winds and gusts. But certainly something to look at is that separation between the wind speed and the gust speed. Now, when you start to increase in altitude, the ground friction obviously disappears, so the wind is able to move more freely. And also, as you increase, the air becomes less dense. So when the air becomes less dense, to move it is a lot easier. So the momentum it can pick up from wind, it will actually continue because it has less resistance. It's a lot lighter. So one thing I would say is just please check these apps and always cross-reference apps as well, because you know, one app might read a 10-mile-an-hour gust, whereas another app might read a 12-mile-an-hour gust. So I would always read that as an 11 to be safe, somewhere in between. But definitely windy has been a huge help to me, certainly. And one thing I will say is always check the different altitudes at what the wind speeds are, because that day, you know, I really got caught out. You know, it seemed so quiet on the ground, yet 1,000 feet above was, you know, 20-mile-an-hour wind. So I could have very easily ended up landing out somewhere, or you know, or even worse, getting into some difficulties. So any questions on wind, please feel free to ask comments below. But it's certainly something that I wanted to share with you today. And as you can see from my videos that I'm about to post now, you'll see that actually it was a bit, you know, you'll see as my legs are sort of looking down on this view, you'll actually see I'm not moving anywhere very fast. And that was the headwind that I was encountering. And again, you know, that headwind can very easily turn into a crosswind, which can cause you to track sideways in the sky instead of flying forward. So one thing I would take from this is check the apps, check your weather, check your wind speed at different altitudes. But also, if you're going to do a long distance cross-country flight, always check the weather along that route as well, because where you take off from the field you fly from may have a totally different scenario to the field you're planning to fly to. But in this instance, I was very lucky and I managed to get back to the field. But the most important thing here was don't panic, take your time, and just try and get that aircraft under control and land it safely. And as always, guys, you know, taking off is an option, landing is not. You have to land. So, you know, bear that in mind. I know a lot of eager pilots out there love to fly. I am one of those pilots, always looking for an opportunity in the weather. Don't push it. You only get one chance of these. And please remember, check the apps, be safe, and learn from my mistakes. Because, you know, it's important that we remain safe at all times. what app I actually use during my flying. Windy is an app, one of the apps that I've found to be very useful. This is not an endorsement for them. This is me purely showing you which app I use for flying. Windy is the one that I find the most accurate for me at the moment. So this is how the app looks in the App Store. It's the red logo with windy.com. Free to download, and I find very useful. So once you've got the app loaded onto your phone or your Mac, you simply click at the top here. There is a logo that says Windy, and there you can type your location you want to look at. So I'm just going to look at Redditch, West Midlands, and what it actually does is brings up here on the map Redditch for me. So we'll just zoom in. So there we go, there's Redditch. So I like to actually find the field that I fly from, or one of the fields that I fly from. So we'll zoom in and I will actually show you where we fly from. So as you zoom in here, you can see very quickly you've got these streaks going across the screen. This actually signifies the wind direction. At the bottom here you have the days. So say I wanted to check the weather for Thursday at 12 o'clock. It's not a good time to fly, so if we just move that time bar on slightly, say 4 o'clock, you can see these small rashes as they look actually speed up, which indicates to me the wind is actually picking up, but it gives you a good orientation for the wind direction. So if we double tap in closer and drop this pin by one single click, it actually shows me the wind speed in miles per hour at ground level. Now, an important part about this, which is something that I should have checked before my flight that you've seen, is to check the altitude at which the different wind speeds are. So on the right down here, it's quite hard to see. You have these 3 bars. If you click that, you can see here it signifies that this is the surface speed. So we have a 10 mile an hour wind at surface level. If we slide this bar, it will go 330 feet. And as you can see, the wind speed is now increased by 5 miles per hour. So, when climbing out, you know that you're going from a 10 mile an hour wind to potentially a 15 mile an hour wind. And then if we go to, say, 2,000 feet, you can see that wind speed jumps right up to 23 miles per hour, which is probably what I experienced when I took off on this flight. And you can see these streaks again are actually increasing in speed and also length. So if we take it up to, say, 5,000 feet as an example, you can see the wind speed doesn't change much. But if we go to flight level 100, it actually drops again, which is, bizarre. So there you go. This is just a quick, brief introduction to the weather app that I use. Again, very, very good. I'm happy with it. It's been pretty accurate up till now. It's just that this feature here is something that I would highly recommend you do before flying. Just check those different altitudes so you can see the different wind speeds at different levels. I hope you found this informative, guys. Please like and subscribe and leave any comments below. I would love to hear them. Thank you.